Hello everyone, thanks for joining me again for another week of this podcast. Today I've got an experience from Ingrid H. Her experience is on the endearth.org website, and this experience actually has a YouTube video linked to it, which I haven't watched, but and she's also written a book as well. It's called A Brightly Guided Life: How a Scientist Learned to Hear Her Inner Wisdom. And you can click on that link, I guess, if you want to buy the book. But I'm just reading, I don't know if it's just a segment or a summary of the book on the endearth.org website. And this is how it goes. In September of 1973, when I was nearly 3, I fell into a reservoir of water located on the patio of the house where I grew up in Colombia. This cement tank was about 5 feet deep, was above ground, and held 900 gallons of frigid water. Bogota in Colombia is a high altitude city that can be quite chilly in the morning, and the water in the reservoir might have been below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The purpose of this deep tank was to collect water for hand washing clothes. So next to the tank, there was a small flat surface for scrubbing. Early one morning after my parents had left for work, I and my 2 sisters, none of us over 3, left the house in the hands of the maid. She was a young lady who didn't pay too much attention to us when my parents were not around. That morning, my oldest sister and I decided to play catch across the tank. The walls of the tank were high for us, so we grabbed some stools and managed to pull ourselves up. My sister sat comfortably on the flat surface next to the tank, and I kneeled precariously on the thin edge at the other side. I had to make an effort to keep my balance. What happened next is still so vivid in my mind that I can remember every detail like it happened yesterday. My sister and I were playing with medium-sized balls, one dark and yellow, the other green. The balls had the letters of the alphabet engraved on them, next to pictures of an animal or an object. We were throwing the balls to each other when the yellow ball slipped from my hands. I tried to grab it, but it rolled on the surface of the water. Then I lost my balance and fell into this dark and seemingly bottomless hole. My eyes locked onto the picture of a smiling white bunny painted on the ball as I was falling. I can still feel the texture of the letters slipping through my fingers. The first feeling of the plunge was a shocking coldness. My body convulsed violently, and it felt like my chest was imploding. My desperation was intense, as I couldn't breathe. When I touched the bottom, I instinctively thrust upwards with my feet, but I rapidly sank again, and then my body became unresponsive. I could hear my sister screaming distantly from the surface, trying to reach me. but there wasn't anything she could do. She was too little to reach me. I could feel my heart pounding in my head like a bass drum. With my eyes open, I stared hopelessly into the darkness. Then suddenly came a feeling of total relief. I don't know why then, but I was at peace and there was no anguish. My heart stopped pounding. Everything turned absolutely still. I was no longer cold, and I didn't feel like fighting anymore. My body simply became insubstantial. Then I noticed that a dim light, like a candle, had somehow begun glowing, just enough to illuminate my watery surroundings. I could see little bubbles, and then behind them I noticed a body suspended in the water. I remember looking curiously at its expressionless face and seeing the eyes staring wide open. This was my own lifeless body, but I was neither surprised nor frightened to recognize it. Instead, I felt an immense joy and freedom, and soon the image of my body was replaced by the most beautiful flowers blooming from nowhere. And before I knew it, I was somehow being lifted and carried away by the flowers. In hindsight, it's no wonder that I was relieved to be freed from the burden of my body. I was a very fragile and sick baby and always felt unwell. As the mysterious flowers lifted me away, everything felt peaceful and bright. At last, I was free from the aches and pains I'd carried since birth. So I simply kept going away without ever looking back at my body. I then abruptly found myself in the maid's bedroom, looking down on her lounging on the bed. She was listening to the radio, unaware of what had happened to me. Next, I was looking at my mum walking down the street several blocks away from the house, coming up on her bus stop. Time and distance had vanished for me. I could be anywhere at any time. It wasn't until that moment that I realized I didn't possess a defined form. I could communicate with everything, and I was part of everything. It was like the wholeness and I were one. As I sank into an atmosphere of pure bright light, I had the clear awareness that before I became a human, I was a being made of pure light, just as I was now. While I was experiencing this blissful state of being, my mum suddenly sensed an intense feeling of dread. She turned around and ran back home as fast as she could. When she came into the house, she knew exactly where to go. On the patio, she found my older sister leaning into the tank, helplessly wailing to her, "Ingrid's in there, and I can't reach her." When my mum pulled my lifeless body out from the water, several minutes had passed. My lips were blue, my body cold, my skin pale, and I had no pulse. She was trained in CPR, so she pushed her fingers into my little chest and blew air into my lungs until I began choking and gurgling. I don't remember feeling anything when she was trying to revive me, By that time, I was far away. Suddenly, I was falling, as if I had jumped from the top of the tallest high-rise in the world, feeling as though I was being sucked into that body like a vacuum. Then came the return of the intense, agonizing cold. I knew I was back. When all of this happened to me, I was just a baby. I didn't have any preconceived notions about near-death experiences. At the time, I was too little even to understand that essentially I had died. All I knew was that I'd left my body and went to a place of indescribable well-being. However, this experience didn't feel unfamiliar to me. Somehow I comprehended that the current life I was living was just a continuation of a very long existence. As I grew up and remembered my drowning, I could never get away from the question, how could I have seen my lifeless body if I was still alive? This experience made it clear to me that that there was an existence beyond the body. Like the shell of a crab is an extension of the crab itself, our body is also but a shell, and when it is not needed, it will fall away. Before I was 3, I was gifted with knowing that had existed for a very long time. In fact, I have come and gone in different realms many more times, wearing many different shells. For about a year after my young near-death experience, often while falling asleep, I started seeing colours, hearing sounds, and feeling motions like the ones I experienced during my drowning. Time would start to slow down, then abruptly speed up. It also felt as if for an instant I was being taken somewhere else. Then I'd experienced a vacuum inside my belly and chest while being pulled back in. This feeling was disturbing indeed, but it came with a glimpse of a dimension I had been part of and wanted to go back to. I was completely unaware at the time that I was having out-of-body experiences. Over time, the length of these journeys increased, and the uncomfortable feeling of falling back into my body simply vanished. The dramatic changes in colours, sounds, and movements persisted, but they stopped bothering me. In fact, I looked forward to them because they opened the door into a very serene place where I felt completely calm, free, and safe. Since my near-death experience, my health had deteriorated. I refused to eat and often felt upset. I would look at myself in the mirror, scratch my face, and pull my hair out while hysterically crying. Then I would run to my mum and scream out loud, "You don't understand. I am not this person. This is not me. This is not my name. I should not be here." Patiently, she would hug me, wipe away my tears, and murmur, "Don't say things like that. You're a smart and pretty girl. God has given you this life, and you should be thankful." Since I wasn't able to communicate my feelings in a way that people could understand, I became frustrated and increasingly isolated from the world. Most of the time, I just wanted to be left alone. My sisters were too young to understand what was happening, and my parents were too busy working and trying to survive day to day. So they did what they could to deal with a very challenging situation. Thankfully, the help that I needed arrived in a most unexpected way. Right after my 4th birthday, during one of my vivid journeys, I was surrounded by star-like figures of pure light shining everywhere. They were of different sizes, and the colors were mostly white, silver, and gold. Suddenly, one of them, shining in pure gold, shaped itself into a human form and moved toward me until I sensed its touch. Feeling absolutely astonished, I said, "Wow, you are a being of light." And then I snapped awake. Afterwards, I kept seeing the lights frequently while sleeping, so I became eager to go to bed. During some of the visits, many of them would be shaped as humans. Others remained shapeless, bright light. It was chiefly the golden ones which adopted human form. On very rare occasions, blue and silver transformed. Regardless, I knew that each of them was a being. Each time that we were together, I sensed the deep feeling of joy that one could experience upon returning home after being homesick for a long time. I always felt more peaceful and healthier and began interacting more with my family. I told them that I felt good because I was meeting beings of light while I slept. My parents felt relieved because I was sleeping well, feeling better, and having good dreams. For a while, I could see these beings when I went to bed, but before long they started to appear anytime, anywhere. The first time I saw one with my eyes open, I stood in the shower, relaxing as the water washed over me. Suddenly, an intense and astonishing blue light flashed on before me, staying for a few seconds before it vanished. Even at 4 years of age, I knew it was a being of light. I felt both thrilled and peaceful at the same time. They kept reappearing often, sometimes bringing with them the delightful fragrance of flowers. They didn't say or do anything in particular, but they were so stunning, and I felt so loved in their presence that nothing more in their presence was needed. I first heard them talk after I threw a big temper tantrum. Since my near-death experience, I didn't identify with my name, and sometimes I felt bothered about people calling me Ingrid. That particular day, I got very angry at the maid for calling my name repeatedly. I turned to her and said, "Don't you understand? That is not my name." So she replied, "Okay then, what is your name?" "I don't need one," I answered, then got very mad and walked away crying. That night, as I fell asleep, the bright golden being of light embraced me, and I heard a voice talking in a very loving and clear manner. "It is going to take a while for everyone around you to understand," it said. "Understand what?" I asked, feeling confused and astounded. "Understand that your true self does not need a name. As you are discovering, names are not needed in the realm of the light. You're right, I affirmed. All things that you are experiencing, the being continued, and the ones that you will experience are all gifts given to you to help yourself and others. I don't understand. How am I helping anyone? I asked. All I'd been hearing from people was that my behavior was not helping. More than you imagine, the being answered. But don't worry, because eventually everything will be clear to you, and you will be able to communicate with everyone in a way that they will understand. For now, just stay calm and don't mention this conversation to anyone because they are not ready to understand. Remember, we are here and you can talk to us. We are always listening. Still, it was hard for me to understand why nobody could understand me. Why did I feel so peaceful with the beings of light, but so uneasy when surrounded by humans? I couldn't understand why this was happening to me, to which the voice simply replied, because you are special and you are beginning to know it. So then I said, what do you mean that I'm special? Everyone is special, but they don't all know it yet. Just remember, you are not alone and you will meet people to help you walk your path. So you do not need to worry. Then all was quiet. After receiving this message, I felt a lot calmer, and even though things were still not clear in my mind, I didn't need to ask any more questions. My tantrum stopped, and for a while I felt at peace. But the question of why me continued to resurface throughout the course of my life. Only when I got a little older could I understand the beings of light had started to teach me faith and trust. All problems could be resolved if I just allow myself to rest calmly in the caring hands of divine guidance. But I was very resistant, and that resistance would bring me a great deal of pain in my life. And that's the end of Ingrid's experience. That was a really clearly put together piece. It concisely explained exactly what happened to her in an order that was easy to decipher, and just really clear language that was easy to understand and well written altogether. In fact, I wouldn't mind reading her whole book, because if this is a little excerpt from it, it's very, very nicely written, and it sounds like this is just the start. It sounds like it's only spoken about what's happened to her as a very young child when she was around 3 years of age. So it sounds like this book is about what's happened as she's gotten older, and her connection to these beings, and probably is a book worth checking out if you're interested. So I don't really need to go through that again. It's so easy to understand. There's not much need to analyze it, but I will anyway. I'll go through it again because some of you probably like the commentary, but if you don't, you can stop playing now, and you probably got just as much as you'll get out of it, so as you can. So if you're going now, thank you for joining me, and if not, I'll do my best with a bit of commentary for you. So Ingrid. She is 3 years old. No, she's actually two. She's actually two when she has her near-death experience, which is pretty remarkable, really. So she is a very young girl in a city called Bogota in Colombia, and she's playing with a couple of her sisters. I This is probably the one part of the experience I couldn't quite get my head around, but they're playing on this, I don't know, well or tank of water, and they're throwing some kind of ball around with some letters engraved on them and pictures of animals, and uh, then the unthinkable happens, and Ingrid falls into this water. Now, she is in this city that reaches very cold, in fact, close to freezing temperatures. So when she plunges into this water, her body instantly shrinks at the cold and scares her, and she obviously can't swim, so she starts sinking to the bottom. Doesn't say how deep the tank is, but it's obviously doesn't need to be that big. Oh, and I guess she's only not even three, so most people that age wouldn't be able to swim anyway. So, and then the tank wouldn't have to be that deep for her to drown in. It doesn't take that much water to drown a baby. So there she is in this water, and suddenly she's in this incredibly startled, anxious state, and then she kind of, I guess, succumbs to a situation. She stops resisting, and she feels her heart stop. Everything turns still, and she no longer feels the water temperature. It's no longer cold. She just loses the urge to fight altogether. And this is that point of the experience, I guess, is absolutely astounding, because they go from living in this world, in this physical realm, and relying on the senses to give you, me, this person having the experience they're having, and they go from relying on this body to provide them with their existence to suddenly slipping out of that. And the miraculous thing is that it doesn't end. The experience of consciousness continues, and that transition from physical realm to the next dimension is a key part in all these near-death experiences. So for her, as this is happening at that moment of death and transition, she notices there is a dim light in this water tank, and it's like a candle, and it slowly begins to glow darker and kind of illuminate the surroundings she's in, this little tank. And she can see there's some bubbles, and behind these bubbles she realizes she's looking at a body, and this body looks kind of familiar to her, and she takes a closer look and realizes that she is looking at her own lifeless body. It's incredible, isn't it, that the spirit or the soul is able to leave the body and then continue to have the awareness of what the human body is, in terms of it being able to move around and look in certain areas and still be cognitive enough to understand what it is actually looking at. And in this case, this girl is very young. She's not even three. And she is now in her spirit form, and she's observing the physical body she was once a part of, and is able to put two and two together and notice and realize, wow, I'm no longer in that body, but even more, wow, I'm still alive, or, I'm still existing. So as this realization sinks in, she starts to see these flowers everywhere, and they're just blooming from nowhere, and they start to lift her up. It's almost like these flowers become able to move, and like people can. They're able to lift her up and carry her out of this tank. She starts to feel incredibly relieved at this point because it's all kind of sinking in. She realizes that the body she was in was not the most healthy one, and it was always kind of struggling. It was usually in a bit of pain, and it was an actual huge relief for her to be outside of that body and no longer constrained by the fragileness of it. Then she realizes she has this ability in this new form to go wherever she wants. So she goes and checks out the maid's bedroom and notices she's just chilling out on her bed, listening to the radio, not doing much, totally unaware of the situation that's going on just outside the house in the water tank. And then she realizes, this girl, Ingrid, that there's not really in her current form anything that is stopping her from going anywhere she wants. And not really anything, there's no such thing as time in this other dimension either. It's just, you can do pretty much what you want, go and see whatever you want. And I guess when she refers to there's no such thing as time, I guess that means you can, in theory, go forward or into the past from a human's perspective. Because if there's no such thing as time, then you can be anywhere at any point in the history of the universe that you'd like to witness. And that's pretty exciting for all of us. Well, it is for me anyway, to think that as a spirit, once we're no longer in our body, in our minds, and in this newfound form in another dimension, we can go and travel back all the way to the dinosaurs, or potentially go into the future. But what's even more exciting to me personally, although that is pretty cool, that's definitely something I would like to do, being able to see the evolution of other planets as well, and check out that. That's exciting to me as well. And at that moment where she kind of realizes there's no such thing as time or distance or space, everything is pretty interconnected, she kind of has a look at how she's traveling around to see if she has any distinguishable features or body anymore. And she realizes she doesn't, of course. There's nothing there. But she could, she says, communicate with everything, and feels as though she is a part of everything. It was like the wholeness and I were one. It's interesting, isn't it, how people describe this connectedness, this oneness with everything, but obviously still maintain this kind of individual sense of self, or individual point of awareness where they can go and do whatever they like, but also feel as though they're part of the whole. It's just one of these aspects of near-death experiences that are really difficult to comprehend, and I guess you kind of have to go and experience one for yourself to really get an idea of what they're talking about, because it's just incredible to think that this wholeness, this one, this source, if that's what they're talking about here, is made up of an infinite number of souls that are all having their own individual point of view of what is going on in the universe, and how can that be? How can a one source have all these multiple things that make that are what it is, and be aware of every little thing that's going on at the same time? It's amazing, and yet this individual part of the source is having its own individual experience while simultaneously experiencing the experiences of everyone else at the same time. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, it's mind-boggling, but then I think of the miraculous nature of this universe we live in, the incredible beings you and I are, this amazing planet we live on, and then I think, well, if this is what the physical world looks like, the spiritual world is going to be equally as breathtaking and probably even more mind-bogglingly um, complex and way beyond human comprehension, because it's not going to be limited by form. It becomes an even more limitless prospect, because form obviously has limitations, and when you take that limitation away, um, the options for what can be displayed in that dimension become incredibly infinite. But if you look at what source or the universe or God or whatever you want to call it has done with the physical world we can see as humans, it's pretty insanely beautiful and just an incredible sight when you see some of these photos that these new telescopes are picking up, and just the awe-inspiring pictures they bring back, plus the fact that they just don't know. They just don't have the answers. The smartest minds in our world do not have the answers to how this universe truly started, and how big it is, and there's so many questions still to be answered, and to think that that is just the tip of the iceberg, and this physical universe is just is not all there is absolutely crazy. And knowing that we are beings of light that can get to explore that at some point in time, for me, is deeply satisfying. Then she realizes she can kind of see what her mum's doing, and as soon as she puts her awareness into her mum in this, her mum picks up this feeling of intense dread. It's like they kind of have a bit of communication here. So although she doesn't actually say she talks to her mum, or tells her she's in trouble, just the fact that Ingrid's spirit is able to track her down, if you like, and finds her at the bus stop waiting for the bus. As soon as she does that, the mum gets this intense feeling of dread and turns around and starts running back to the house. It's like she just automatically is aware that something is wrong with her child, and the first thing she does is go to this tank where the kid is. No one tells the mum where she is or what's wrong, or even if there is anything wrong. She just automatically goes back to this tank and um, starts to try and rescue her daughter, and finds her in the water and starts CPR. So that is how Ingrid's experiences start at a very young age. This brush with death, as as a child, and from there the experience continues because she goes on to say after about a year after her near-death experience, so when she's about 4 years of age, she starts to hear these colors and weird sounds and emotions, and they kind of remind her of when she has this near death experience. It's a very similar sensation. And then as time goes by and she reflects on this, she realizes what is happening here is she's getting a glimpse of another dimension again. And I guess it is what people term having an out of body experience these days. She says that since her near death experience, her it's amazing she can actually remember back to this point in her life. But she says after the near death experience, so when she's just almost three, from that point on, she refuses to eat, often feels upset, would scratch her face, and she kind of is a really difficult child. She's screaming to her parents, this is not who I am. I am a being of light. I should not be here. And her mum and dad must be kind of pulling their own hair out and thinking, why has my daughter changed like this? What has happened to her? And they try to reassure her and say, don't say things like that. You've got so much going for you. God has given you this life and you should be thankful for it. But she's just this little girl. She's so young, but she's feeling so disconnected and frustrated. So she's seen this glimpse of the other side, and it's given her a taste of what it's like back there, and reminded her, I guess, of where she's come from and what she truly is. And it's kind of given her a comparison, I guess, to the ease of that type of existence compared to the difficulties and challenges being a human entails. And when you are reminded, I guess, at any point in life, but particularly when you're so young and immature, you would be really frustrated. You wouldn't understand the gift, I guess, of being in this human body, and what that brings. And you would probably even more as a very young child just want to be able to go back to this state of being in bliss, with your soul family, which is what these beings of light sound like, and away from the darkness and challenges earth life brings. So she's, really confused. She has had this near death experience and she's kind of having these out of body experiences. She doesn't really know what this is all about because she's so young. She doesn't have the understanding that, adults do if they, research this topic and kind of understand what is happening to her. She is finding that her experience is becoming extremely frustrating. And then one day, just after her fourth birthday, so just after a year after her near death experience, she gets visited by these beings of light, and they're in all kinds of colors, gold and silver and blue and white. And one of them suddenly makes a human form and gives her a hug, and she's absolutely astounded and screams out, "You are a being of light, you're back." And these light beings continue to visit her as she goes to sleep. So I'm assuming she means in her dreams here. They're able to contact her that way, which is often the case with these types of experiences. Sometimes they can be transported over into the dream world and can visit people that way. And after these visitations occur, she seems to think that this calms her down a bit. Like she becomes a little bit more adjusted to being a human again, and her behavior reflects that. And her parents are a little relieved because she's sleeping better, she's in a better mood, and having good dreams, and just being a normal 4 year old again, I guess. And these beings of light just continue to visit her, and as time goes by, like, but this is still her at a very young age. Uh, but she's still confused, obviously. As a 4 year old, you would be, because you sort of got a foot in each dimension there, and you wouldn't quite know what is going on. And for her, one of the big aspects that seem to be resonating at her young age is she just doesn't identify with her human form. So much so that she doesn't even like being called Ingrid. She doesn't. It's not that she doesn't like the name. It's just she doesn't like being labelled as something, because these beings of light don't have a name, and she feels she probably doesn't need one either. So one day the maid um, repeatedly asks her to do something and says, Ingrid, do this, Ingrid, do that. And she screams back, you don't understand, that is not my name. So the maid says, okay, so what is your name? And the little kid says, look, I don't need one. And later that night, the beings of light come to her again, and she's upset because she's confused. And the beings of light say, understand that your true self does not need a name. As you are discovering, names are not needed in the realm of the light. And these light beings give her a little bit of wisdom and say that, everything in this life is going to be fine. Everything will be clear to you as you get older and you're able to mature a bit. And just remember that everything you ever need is always there. You really are set, and it's just your mind that gives you feelings of inadequacy or lack, when really you are connected to a whole universe of beings out there, and so you never are alone. And the being says one day, so what do you mean I am special? And uh, he says, everyone is special, but they don't all know it yet. There will be people to help you walk your path, so you do not need to worry. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of Ingrid's experience. She, like I said, this was well written and an interesting story, and I quite enjoyed reading that one. So I guess one of the biggest themes of this little experience I've just read out is the question, who am I? This little girl is kind of tormented between this physical realm where she's called Ingrid and has all this pain and suffering, and then she's given this glimpse behind the veil where she's this incredible light being that feels no pain and has so many friends and is in a state of joy and freedom. And it kind of gives me the impression that, she would rather be there. Obviously, I guess like most people having a near-death experience, they prefer this other dimension to the one we are in. And I guess this life we have as a human is incredibly challenging, but it's also obviously here. This place is obviously here to give us some experiences that we can't get in this spiritual realm. There's an immediacy to it. The consequences here are lived quite dramatically, and you need to work out what works for you best to make it as a joyful experience as possible. So I guess when you ask yourself, who am I? It's the answer is going to vary according to your individual beliefs, and but for me, I try to see myself as a being of light now, and not this body, this shell, this Nick dove that this world calls me, because I think all of us are not from this world. We are just having a temporary visit here and an experience here, and one day we get to go back and connect with those beings we've known for a very long time. Like this experience says, she becomes aware that she's this being who has been around a lot longer and experienced many shells, I think is what she says. So that implies that she is, or what she's referring to there is reincarnation, and the individual being of light that she is has been in many different bodies and beings before, and had many different lifetimes. And it's just interesting to think that, wow, that's most likely all of our stories too. I mean, there's probably some souls that are younger or less experienced than others, but generally speaking, if we're getting to the stage of coming into a human, you would have thought that most of us have had some practice on some, easier, is that the word, life forms, because humanness is a difficult one to tackle. But obviously, it's an incredible notch to tick off, I guess, once you've done the human experience. And I can kind of see why people would want to come back and do it again, because it is pretty incredible. And obviously humanity is constantly evolving, so to be able to it's never going to be the same. Humans are always going to be, like, just think a few thousand years ago, they were totally different to what they are today, and in a few thousand years more, they're going to be totally different again. So the fact that we are all here in these bodies right now at this point in history has given us the chance to experience a life form that is never going to be repeated again. So it's a unique opportunity, and although it has its challenges, it's still lots of gifts and lots of reasons to be grateful for being in the body we are right now. But the best thing, I think, to take out of